Hello, good morning and good afternoon to you all. Thanks a lot for being here in the last of our last year webinar, which is our predictions, which is one of the most hot topic for the market. Let's see a few housekeeping before we start with the webinar. You can listen to our webinar through the computer or dial-in. You have a Q&A box. All the questions will be answered at the end, but also we will try through the chat to answer the question during the presentation. We are recording this session, so you will receive the on-demand version through emails, and also we will publish in YouTube and in our corporate websites as well. And the last thing is that you can get 1 CP credit for participating in this webinar. So thanks a lot again. I'll leave you with Corey and Mark, and I hope you enjoy all of this wonderful webinar.
Awesome. Thank you, Alicia. As she mentioned, welcome so much to today's webinar, which is our 2022 cybersecurity predictions, which we've scarily titled Defending Against Cyber Dystopia. Before we talk about kind of our tongue-in-cheek joke there, you know, there's a good reason we do predictions, but hopefully we won't get a cyber dystopia. Why don't Mark and I just introduce ourselves really quick? If you haven't joined our webinars before, I'm Corey Knockreiner. I'm currently the Chief Security Officer for WatchGuard, so that means I actually manage the security of our own company, but I still retain all the roles, and I used to have the main title of CTO, Chief Technology Officer, and again, still have that role. In that role, I manage the threat lab. And whether it's in the CSO or CTO role, Mark has always been my right-hand man. So I'll let Mark, as my operations manager, introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. Like Corey said, I'm Mark LaLiberty. I'm our security operations manager. And for the last few years, been helping both in the security of our organization itself, but also overseeing our threat lab, where basically we get to take in all of the threat intelligence we get from customers that have opted into sharing that with us, third-party feeds, the latest news, and try and distill that down into our view of the threat landscape going forward. And that kind of culminates every year here in November, December, where we get to take a forward-looking view of it and figure out what we think is going to be occurring over the course of the next year or so when it comes to some of these cyber events. And like, as you'll see from the title of this webinar, sometimes they do tend to take a bit of a dystopian approach. I think anyone that saw, I think it was 2019, 2020 predictions, saw us go really over the edge with that at one point. But, you know, they're all grounded in truth as we do them, as you'll see.
Yeah. So speaking of that, I think that's a good transition. Why do we do predictions? You know, I think some people like predictions every year. They're kind of fun to think about the future, but some people kind of get sick of it. So I want you guys to know there's some very practical reasons for you to be here today. And if you've heard us do webinars about our predictions over years past, you might have heard this before. But no matter what our predictions is, they have true underlying trends that we're going to be talking about. You know, really the only practical reason we use predictions is a way to get attention so that we can talk about the underlying trends. So when we make predictions, they're very specific and scary things. Sometimes they're leaning very future forward, thus the dystopian view. But before we even get to the prediction, we'll be talking about different trends that are already true. And these are threat trends, things that if you learn about and pay attention to, you can adjust your defenses to make sure that you protect your organization and yourself from them. So the trends driving them are real. Every year, even when we miss, if you listen to our podcast a few weeks ago, we talked about how we did last year. And I think if I remember right, we got just barely over a passing grade mark. Maybe 50%, a little bit, a fraction over 50%. I
think it was like a solid D minus, at least by my grading.
Yeah, and even though that's not a great grade, the truth is every trend for the ones that missed are still there and are still real. And the other truth is some of the predictions we've made 2 years ago, like one of the 2018 predictions, for instance, have come true now. So the predictions are fun. You know, they're an interesting way to talk about it, and we want you to understand the worst potential possibility if we as an industry don't secure ourselves. But really, as you can see by the image change, it's not just tea leaves and crystal balls. We really do want you to understand the trends you should defend against next year. So with that said, why don't we jump in, and me and Mark are going to bounce through each of these predictions, and hopefully we can also share some fun videos we made that are give you a little laugh about the predictions as we share them. So the first prediction is state-sponsored mobile threats will trickle down to the criminal underground. That's prediction number one. Let's go ahead and unpack that. What do we mean by that? Well, first of all, if you've been following the threat landscape, you know mobile malware exists. You know, Android phones often, if you go to non-sanctioned third-party stores, it's possible to download Trojans. And a lot of these are criminal Trojans, but not super sophisticated. And most important, they're not in a lot of volume. It exists, but we really haven't seen criminals leverage attacks on mobile phones, whether iOS or Android, in huge volume. Part of the reason for that, in my opinion, is because these phones are much more hardened than the traditional computer is. They use secure boot in more strong ways. They very much use signed code. On a traditional computer, you may be able to get away from the official store and load unsigned code, but on phones, that's a much harder proposition, even if sideloading is possible. But the point is, possible, but we haven't seen it grow. Why haven't we seen it grow? Well, where mobile malware is taking off is among nation states. And a lot of this prediction hinges on something we've been seeing over the last year, where companies like the NSO Group, a quote unquote legitimate Israeli company, creates a product for governments that, in my opinion, is just malware. So if you've been following the news, you've probably heard about the Pegasus spyware created by this group. And long story short, these companies are finding vulnerabilities, and because they're getting paid big bucks, their target market is governments. They sell their malware to governments. And they have some very smart researchers that find new zero day. For instance, Pegasus was able to infect iOS phones. It leveraged a number of vulnerabilities that the NSO group presumably found in order to do that. And it was sold for very big money to many nation states. And this prediction is that's not good. As these nation states that have more sophistication and more money to throw at the problem find novel and unique new ways to hijack phones, eventually that stuff is going to trickle down. By the way, just a little more background on the NSO group. As I mentioned, they tend to sell to governments. If you listen to their arguments for this, they basically claim, oh, we only sell to friendly, democratic, non-autocratic governments. You know, we're not spreading malware. This isn't malware. But the truth is, you know, the world has seen some Gulf states that lean more autocratic using this to target journalists, activists, and politicians. So in my opinion, that's kind of a false claim. This is really much malware. And when you have Pegasus on your device, by the way, it can monitor everything you do. You know, it captures all your texts, all your calls. It can record. It shows your geolocation, since that phone has that lovely, you know, GPS location, and it can steal all your passwords. So they can call it spyware for good guys all they want, but it is malware. And really, we're just saying, as these state-sponsored threats leak out, as these really sophisticated state-sponsored threats, if they continue to become a thing, they're going to leak, and criminals get their hands on them, and now everyone in the world has to worry about criminals leveraging the same techniques. You know, there's probably a number of examples of this, but Stuxnet is the easiest one, even though it happened so long ago. Many of you are probably sick of hearing about Stuxnet, but you certainly remember in I think it was 2010-ish period, at least that's when the US government and Israel started making it, Stuxnet, a very advanced piece of malware that not only infected Windows machines, but programmable logic controllers, came out using 4 different zero-day, all kinds of smart evasion tactics, all kinds of neat ways to hide on a computer. As soon as the first research group released everything it did, hackers started copying it within 2 weeks. Some of those shortcut exploits were used. So we have examples many times in the past when these sophisticated state-sponsored threats get out, bad guys, criminals will use them too. And we are saying that mobile malware is going to increase because of this. So that's the prediction, but I want to give you the fun version. So let's try this out for the first time. Give me 2 seconds and I will start our first video. And let me go ahead and do that right now. So hopefully our corny humor plays. That's our fun way of making this more fun. I hope you enjoy it. We'll
I think
show
we
you our
should keep our
videos
day job.
throughout. I don't know. You do pretty good. You should get an Oscar. I should probably go even deeper into management, right? Before I jump to takeaways, though, Mark, I didn't know if there's anything you wanted to add to the NSO story and other reasons we made this prediction.
No, I think you covered all of them.
Cool. So obviously, what's the practical takeaway here is it's really we need to start thinking of really protecting our mobile devices. Some of you may have done that. There are certainly security controls for them. You know, as we've mentioned a
I'm gonna
number
hop
of
back to the
times.
deck, Corey.
Oh, I apologize. I thought I had. Thank you
Yep.
for telling me. Hopefully, you guys see that now.
Still the
I
100
think
yard stare from the video. There we go.
just took a while. The rainbow circle of Apple death was taking longer than normal. So
Probably
the practical
Pegasus.
takeaway, yeah, there we go. They now have Mac OS flaws too. So takeaway, protect your mobile devices. If you have corporate mobile devices, obviously there's actually clients you can load nowadays that help with security. I believe we even have some ourselves. But one of the things I recommend for corporate sanctions of devices is some sort of control. There's a number of lovely acronyms analysts always have, like mobile device management, enterprise mobile management. But ultimately, these are central control panels that whether you're using Android's iOS or something else, they know ways to hook into the general security policies of all those phones. For instance, on iPhones, they'll use Apple's technique to do it and vice versa. And they give you as the administrator the ability to remotely wipe, to turn things on and off, to make sure there's a PIN or password policy so people can't just swipe to open their phones, and a number of other things. You should certainly do that. And that also should help you lock down that you don't want users downloading files from non-legit sources. You can see in our third bullet, right now, unless it's a sophisticated threat, like maybe the ones the NSO group is making that leverages vulnerabilities on the phone, iOS is a little harder to get malware because you have to get it in Apple's real store. The reason Android tends to be a target isn't because their store isn't secure, but it's more because they have a side-loading capability that allows people to add things from other places. You want to make sure your users don't do that. Now, we live in a pandemic world where companies even like WatchGuard not only use mobile phones a lot for business, but allow people sometimes to use their personal phone. For that, we recommend containerization products. There's products out there that will give access to work resources, but they do so on the phone in this kind of local containerization place where the data does not leave an encrypted store within the phone, separate from the phone's own typical stores. And that is one the company can control. The other thing you can do is use products like Authpoint and single sign-on to leverage SaaS apps. You know, a lot of people, I think SaaS isn't SaaS requires different types of security controls. Some people worry about giving up trust with SaaS because you're putting things in the cloud. But the one good thing with corporate SaaS, having an app that a corporation can control the login for. When we set up Office 365, you know, in order to get to Corey Knockreiner at watchguard.com, I have to go through WatchGuard's gateway. You know, even if I directly accessed Microsoft, when I try to log on with that email, it's going to push me to WatchGuard's authentication mechanism, which my IT controls, and allows me to do things like add MFA to it. And the benefit in this case, because it's SaaS, is that the data is in the cloud under the control of your corporation. And as long as you have policies and mechanisms not to let them download locally, you get some protection and you get the additional control of having corporate authentication control of the SaaS app they're accessing even on their personal phone. The final thing, I don't know, this is a less practical takeaway because, you know, it's not our congressmen and governments that are allowing these legitimate companies to make malware they sell to nation states. But I think as a society, we do have to not like the fact that organizations like NSO Group exists. I don't like personally that their business plan is literally to make malware, even if they call it good guy malware. And I think the fact that, you know, they're a private organization, they're not directly the state, a government, but their target audience is governments, and they're asking prices that make their malware as sophisticated as any government organization can make. And I personally just don't like the fact that they exist without more regulation on them. Mark, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
Nope, very thorough.
Cool. Well, with that, I'll go ahead and switch it to you. Tell me when you're ready for the video.
Yeah, so our next prediction was spear smishing or SMS smishing hammers messenger platforms. And basically, this is the next evolution of some of the phishing and spear phishing that we've seen grow over the past decade or so. Like we're all familiar with the email-based phishing that we get, everything dating back to the old, Nigerian prince going to give you $1 million ones, to the more modern spear phishing that it's really highly targeted towards specific individuals or organization units within a company. And we've seen that now spill over into other platforms too, outside of just email. Like you've got vishing, where someone might try and call you up potentially through an automated service, or these days it seems with those call centers full of people trying to tell you your auto whatever is expiring now. We've seen a lot of text-based or SMS-based phishing as well too, through the traditional text messages that just come by default on phones. But because a lot of those text messages arrive over clear text, your phone operating system, your telco all have visibility into that. They can actually apply controls to try and counter some of that smishing that you see, at least some of the obvious spam ones. That's now we're seeing some of that smishing though. It move over to some of the protected messaging apps that we're using every day. Like WhatsApp is really popular in some parts of the world because of its encryption that it provides from end to end on a mobile device. Same with Signal, Slack, and Teams to other extents as well too. And while a lot of these mobile messaging apps that are not the default text message-based apps provide protections to our privacy and our security with some of these controls, it also makes it a lot more difficult for those app providers and your telco and your phone to kind of crack down on some of this spam or targeted spear phishing that you might get through them. And so our prediction is we're going to see cyber attackers start to pivot towards these messaging apps instead of just text messages on their own, partly because the world seems to be pivoting towards using these apps, but also because it gives them a little more ability to have that message reach the endpoint without interference. Also, some users, for example, might be less vigilant against some of these phishing in these apps. Like you feel like you might be protected because they are, in general, more secure applications too, which might have you let your guard down and potentially fall for one of these messages as well. And this one's kind of based off of some just anecdotal evidence that we've seen throughout the year. We've had internal employees, I think Corey was even one of them, that started getting a lot of text message based phishing in just the last year. And I think all of us have probably seen at least a notable rise anecdotally of some of this style of attack.
If I would add to it, we don't say it in the slide specifically, but it's really leaning towards the spear, meaning the beauty of WhatsApp is not only that it's a mechanism that users users are used to getting text phished by now, and hopefully they're looking out for it. But WhatsApp, as Mark said, has the extra security, but they're spear smishing, meaning what will happen more often than not is a salesperson will get a message from a CEO. And like any social media, WhatsApp allows you to set up a profile, but doesn't necessarily have perfect validation controls. So just like Facebook, I could make a fake account with a picture with the name in a certain way that might look like someone else, or I could spoof in some cases. So what we specifically seen in WhatsApp is the WhatsApp message comes from someone that is probably spelled or adjusted the name a little, but it looks like someone important at your company, and it has a picture there that even matches the person. And then it goes immediately to the simple, oh, I'm traveling, can you do this account transfer, or can you buy me gift cards, as you'll see. And so I also think the additional of the picture in the Signal, Teams, Slacks, in the app just makes people more trusted a little more. So we have been definitely seeing this ourselves. I'll go to the video. By the way, when we were originally doing this, there's an intro on every one of these videos, and we're going to skip it. I apologize that we can't. Unfortunately, the way GoToMeeting makes us do videos, I can't scrub through them. So apologize that we're wasting about 15 seconds on the intro, but hopefully the video content's still worth it. So let me switch to that really quick and play the next one for you. By the way, I don't know if me and Mark have watched every one of these videos, so hopefully this is more fun than it is for you. For me, it's kind of painful.
I
Mark, you
make a
can go
point
ahead.
to not watch any video I'm in.
Cool.
Anyway,
So let's
so how
get
about
into
our
practical tips.
yeah? So when it comes to smishing, especially over some of these mobile apps, it basically boils down to user awareness training, the same thing that helps with any phishing-based attack. Now, we need to make sure that we're training our users to spot phishing no matter which form it comes in, no matter which path it takes to that individual. And so while you're probably already doing phishing awareness training for emails, you might already be doing it for SMS-based phishing. You need to make sure that you're also including knowledge that some of these may arrive over other alternative means, like through some of these chat-based apps. That's really going to be your biggest ability to defend against this. There are still some technical controls that might be able to pick up the slack after the fact, but you're going to get the biggest return on your buck when it comes to user awareness training for this. And you're never going to get your click rate down to 0%. So don't assume that because you haven't reached 0% click rate, it's a failure. The whole point of this user training is to get that click rate as low as possible so that your technical controls are able to pick up and anything that slips through the cracks.
And just so you know, the technical controls, the ones that work on traditional often work on mobile as long as you get the mobile version of them. But things like DNS firewalling, that's what we, for instance, do on traditional laptops, and we can do through our Firebox, where any domain, if your users click something before they get to the domain, we know if it's one of the ones that we've sinkholed because something nasty is going on. And then there's IP-based versions and URL-based versions of those. But of course, in this mobile world, you definitely need one that works on a mobile device. With that, prediction number 3, and this, I guess, is where we get a little dystopian, but believe it or not, I think there's a lot of evidence for this one. And that is, expect a hack to a headline about a space hack to hit the headlines this year. Long story short, we believe there's going to be some hackers in space. I should say that the way the Muppets did, pigs in space. Anyways, this prediction is mostly based on satellite hacking, which is a thing. You know, it's a thing that maybe a lot of folks don't know about. You think satellites are this gear that's way up there, miles ahead of above us. We can't even see them. How could you hack that kind of stuff? But really, obviously, we know there's radio technology that talks to those satellites already. And there's some pretty old satellites too, which they still have computers, but they have older ones, old radio technology that may not have the same security standards. And what it comes down to is with the right equipment, you can actually communicate with and potentially hack satellites. As you can see on the slide, in the past, it might have taken a lot to get the equipment needed to communicate with something that far away, but nowadays, for around $300, you can get the equipment you need to talk to them. And this is something we know nation states and more people are working on. At a recent DEF CON, I think it's now 4 or 5, I have no concept of time after the pandemic, but during DEF CON 29, satellite hacking was one of the themes. There was an entire village, and the US government actually brought technology to allow red teams to kind of try to have a capture the flag around satellite equipment. And the result was researchers found vulnerabilities in satellites they could take advantage of. So satellites are hackable, and it is almost inevitable that's going to happen. The other thing we have happening here, the trend, is the privatization of space, which I, by the way, think is kind of cool. I think Mark follows me there. We have things like Starlink. Starlink will exponentially increase the attack surface up there because Starlink's plan is to have tens of thousands of smaller satellites up there to help give global internet connection to everyone via satellite. And they already, as you know, probably already, they've gone over thousands already, but I think they're literally shooting for 10 to 20,000. So hopefully these are newer satellites and they have security controls, but much more attack surface will be available. And we now have all these things, floating around our atmosphere orbiting that have potential to crash into each other and do kinetic things. And of course, SpaceX, there's nothing bad with corporations also going to space, but again, it's more, there's more than just NASA and the Russian and Chinese governments going to space now. There's many more companies. And we do know that, as we've seen with IoT, as companies try to do things cheaper, they sometimes don't have the same security controls in the past. So those are the two things leading us to this. And by the way, just a few days ago, it was before we officially launched our predictions. You could have seen these predictions as of 2 days ago, but we had written our predictions and already produced the video. This piece came out in the Wall Street Journal talking about this shadow war that is happening in space right now. Our governments do have evidence of other adversarial governments which are running operations and doing probes to each other's space orbiting satellites and stations. So to me, while it hasn't necessarily made the prediction that we have a space hack, we're already hearing that governments are doing this red teaming as we speak. But rather than just talk about it more, this is one of my favorite videos with Mark. So let me go ahead and start our next video. I think that's a fun one. Chris and Mark did a fantastic job, whether they admit it or not. Give me a second to
Kudos
wait
to
for the
Chris
slide.
putting on that costume.
For our international guests, if we're there, if you can't, I'm kind of, if you have to say the joke, it's not good enough. But if you can't tell, we're emulating Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update in all of these skits. So hopefully that comes across as a fun way. So what are the practical takeaways here? Well, I'm going to start by saying, for most of you, you probably don't control any satellites, so there's probably not any practical takeaway for you guys. This is more kind of a prediction for governments and the niche industries, the private industries that are going to space. However, there's an adjacency here. What we're ultimately predicting here is just a continuation of the Internet of Things threat that everyone's been talking about for the past decade. You know, we started Internet of Things thinking about all this consumer gear we have at home, but there's also stuff at the office nowadays, whether it be key card readers, cameras, conferencing systems, printers that have full computers in them. There's IoT at your work, and there's IoT industry in industrial control and what we call operation technology. There's IoT in healthcare, in the Internet of Medical Things. So while satellites are not something you have to worry about, if at the highest level, this is kind of the next level of Internet of Things predictions. We got to realize that more and more the products we have are going to have computers built into them. They don't look like computers, they look like totally different products, but there's a computer there, and if it has a internet connection, whether it be long range radio, 5G in your car, whatever it is, it becomes an attack surface like any other computer. So the practical takeaway you can take here is remember to protect your IoT. A very good example is I've seen a lot of companies, you know, and even we had to update our policies in that we have really good monitoring of all our traditional computers and software, looking at their software levels, making sure we have their patches up to date. But you may not pay attention to your routers, your firewalls, your switches, your camera systems as much. Because in fairness, some of the technologies you use to scan stuff don't actually scan that other stuff. So just a reminder to not forget to have very strong patching policies and monitoring policies to make sure you keep your hardware, your IoT or OT devices up to date as well, and that you segment them. We highly recommend if you have any OT in your network that it lives on a separate network. And the reason you do this is you want to follow the least privilege principle, which we'll talk about later. And yes, people in your trusted network will have to access them, but you want to limit the access to only the things that the IoT device needs to work. That way, if it ever gets compromised, it's not going to affect others. So that is our satellite hack, or let's pass it to you for the next one, Mark.
Sure. And the next prediction is titled Passwordless Authentication Fails Long-Term Without MFA. And this one basically boils down to the trend we've been seeing across the industry over the last, man, it feels like a decade of everyone trying to kill the password. And as of, I think, September 14th or so of this year, Microsoft has officially succeeded in killing the password. If you've got a Microsoft account now, you have the ability to go in and actually delete the password off of it and replace it with another single factor, unfortunately. And when it comes to some of the factors that you can replace this password with, like some are better than others, but in the end, it is still a single factor. Basically, instead of entering a password now, you can use biometrics with like Windows Hello. You can use a FIDO token like a YubiKey. Frighteningly, you can use a OTP emailed to your email address, like a link that you just click on to validate the session, and a few others as well on top of that. But basically, it all boils down to, in the end, we're still only replacing a single factor, that password that you used to have to remember, with something else now. And that doesn't make it inherently more secure just because it's not a password. Like biometrics aren't completely immune to attack. We've seen biometric systems being hacked. Email OTPs are, as I kind of hinted at, practically worthless because at this point, if someone gains access to your email, now they don't even need to know the second password you hopefully had for your Microsoft account. They just have to click a link and now they're in that as well too. It basically boils down to the issue was never really with passwords themselves. The issue was with a single factor for authentication. And replacing that single factor with something else doesn't suddenly solve the issue. And eventually that means that those other single factors, now that they're gaining momentum, they're still going to eventually fail as well too if you're not using multi-factor authentication. So multiple factors paired together with each other. And it's something that
And
we've
with
been
that
preaching.
though, oh sorry, just to pause before we get too much, I do think we had a poll though. So let's, if you don't
Oh
mind,
yeah.
Mark, Alicia, can we go ahead and do the polling question really quick? So as you
So the
can
question is,
see, go ahead.
has your
Can you see it?
organization, we sure can,
Okay.
has your organization adopted passwordless authentication yet? You got a few different answers here. We recognize it's only been, what, like 5 months or so, 4 months since it's become available, at least in Microsoft ecosystems. But I'm willing to
And
bet
I
at least
think,
a
Mark,
few folks have
even
jumped
though
on.
you can do it on your cloud Microsoft account, when it comes to the operating system, it's mostly Windows 10 and 11 that support it down to that level. Is that right?
I believe so, yeah. You have been able to log in with just your face to Windows 10 for a bit. So we've got the results in. Looks like 1% of you have adopted passwordless authentication fully, and to you I say, very brave. Around 6% or so started to, 12% plan to, 81% so far are still a no, though, in this case.
Not
And
surprised.
what, yeah, not surprised at all. Um, and again, what it comes down to is you can't replace just a single factor with another single factor. And while there are obvious usability improvements to our end users by removing these passwords that are potentially complex or hopefully complex these days and
Alicia, we can
replacing them with
go back to slides, by the way. Sorry. Thank you. Go ahead, Mark.
just staring into a camera, that alone is not enough. And so you need to make sure that you're still using multi-factor in these scenarios. It doesn't necessarily mean a password has to be one of those factors. It just has to be two separate things,
Yeah.
something you have, something you know, something you are. Two of those paired together can add and increase security in this situation.
And we'll show our next video, but we'll talk about how we believe that passwordless MFA can be just as convenient as passwordless single factor. But before we do that, why don't we pop into the other video? Again, I wish we could skip these intros for you. We could when they're in the presentation, but GoToMeeting problem. So I will say our team did very good on the copying the weekend update intro. We're a bunch of cornballs if you haven't figured it out.
Can you believe we
So
get
while
paid to do this?
I know, it's fantastic. By the way, poor Chris. Chris did a fantastic job. He was, of course, a Squid Games 443. We use that number. Hopefully, you guys know the 443 is our podcast, 443 Security. But he had only been with us for just under a month as a marketing communication specialist, and we already forced him to go on video. So good job with that, Chris.
Welcome
Thank
to the
you.
team.
So Mark, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mark. You finish up with the takeaways.
Yeah, and I've kind of been harping on this the whole time, where basically the only strong authentication is still multi-factor authentication. And like I said, like it doesn't necessarily mean a password has to be one of those factors. It just means you still have to have multiple factors, because if you're just relying on a single one, especially if it's one of those one-time passwords sent to your email, it's not going to be enough. Same rules still apply even as we move towards this now passwordless future that we seem to be trundling on towards.
Yeah, and I would say very specifically, an example of how you can make it easy and seamless is, and you can do this today with our product. WatchGuard has a product called AuthPoint, which offers enterprise-grade multi-factor to everything: Macs, Windows, your desktop login, your SaaS apps, VPNs, privileged things. But what you can do is set up Windows to use Windows Hello, which will authenticate you with a biometric. But then you have that integrated with our AuthPoint app. And besides that biometric, which kind of acts as your password, you would then get a push authentication to your phone. So your second factor isn't having to type anything. It's just you get a pop-up notification on your phone saying, hey, is the person that looked at the computer with Windows Hello really you? Press approve. And in that case, you're not typing passwords, you're not using passwords, but you're still getting two, and frankly, more factors, because when you do that, it's not only your approval that we're using, but it's key factors you have on your phone itself. And there's even an additional biometric check you can turn on for your phone as well. So it could be literally multi-factor, not just two-factor. But in either case, that to me is just as easy and seamless. The times multi-factor get hard is when you're having to type multiple things more than you normally would. And that's not the case with some of the ways you implement this. So you can still go passwordless, but force MFA is what we're recommending you do. The next prediction is more kind of a business one, and this is that increased cyber insurance costs are driving new security mandates. So a number of things have happened. And by the way, I want to remind you that back in 2018, one of our predictions is more and more companies would be getting cyber extortion insurance. And while that prediction obviously came true, it was a mixed prediction for us. We actually like cybersecurity insurance, including extortion insurance. But one of the things I didn't like, at least at the time, is insurers' strategy for this was to pay ransom. And frankly, they're now paying for that. According to a report that comes from S&P Global, cyber insurers' loss ratio increased for the third consecutive year. By the way, almost exactly since 2018 or 2017 when we made the prediction. And it's increased 25 points in 2020, or up to more than 72%. And so insurers are losing money because of cybersecurity insurance, presumably mostly the extortion insurance. And this likely comes from the fact that we said way back then, they did not have long-term actuaries. They were fixing a short-term problem by paying, and the cost of paying the ransom seemed to be lower than the cost of recovering a business that had no backups. But the long-term issue is they proved the attacker's business model. They made it lucrative. And so, of course, attackers are going to continue doing this forever, which is going to cost you by paying. So the result of this, insurance costs have gone up 72%. This is resulting in premiums. Your cost for cyber insurance is going up. That has increased to 28.6% in 2020, which calculates to 1.62 billion across the US. So because they're paying and they're losing money because of it, costs are going up, and they're transferring those costs to you. But there's a second part of the equation, which is mandates. They also realize that the fact that you're getting hacked, but I'm using a general you guys probably have good security practices, so don't be offended. But the fact that they're finding a lot of their customers are getting hacked, maybe not because of negligence, but because of bad security practice. They don't have the basic blocking and tackling. They haven't scanned their networks. They haven't done patches in time. They have really old end-of-life servers. They have remote access without MFA, maybe even without VPN. And the result is, in order to insure you with cyber insurance, especially extortion insurance, insurers are greatly increasing their requirements, or they will not insure you, or they will insure you at double your normal cost. So now it's very regular if you go to your insurer for cyber insurance, they will be scanning your network for you. They will be sharing that report. And if you have any flags, that's going to affect you. They're going to ask you questionnaires. And if you don't have MFA on VPN, that's going to affect you. So again, the prediction is the soaring costs that have really resulted from ransomware being successful and the fact insurers have been paying out have turned into both increased costs for you guys as well as new mandates. And in my opinion, insurers are going to be the new regulation. If you're lucky enough to run a business that you didn't have to worry about PCI or HIPAA or GDPR, well, now just getting cyber insurance will be the regulation that is driving security at your company. Before we share the hopefully fun video on that one, I would like to pop up poll question number 2. Alicia, if you can help out there. I don't see it yet. Okay.
Can you see it now? Okay.
Yeah, we have it now. Has your cybersecurity and extortion insurance policy changed recently? And your options as you're filling them in, I'll read it. Yes, the price has gone up. Yes, they require new mandates. The third is yes, both. I've not only seen the price go up, but I've seen the mandates have increased. Or I don't have cyber insurance, or I don't know. I guess you can use I don't know for the price. I technically forgot the one no, the price nothing has changed. So apologize for forgetting that, not Alicia's fault. And waiting for results to pop up real quick. So it looks like some of you, a fair amount of you have seen both. I would calculate really quickly that it's just under 30%. Some of you don't have cyber insurance and some of you don't know yet, which is pretty normal. Usually, as we've seen, this happened to us even as a company, but usually, customers have a plan for a year or 3 years, and it's not until you have to renew the plan that you learn about this. So it looks like 1/3 of you are starting to see this happen. For those that don't have cyber insurance, it's not the end of the world. Obviously, I actually want you to have preventative controls first, but I do think cybersecurity insurance is a good additional strategy to having preventative defense, just because as a business, it does offer the ability to save yourself in the event, or even pay. Let's say an incident happens, and even if data is not lost, you can pay for the forensics and all the work you got external folks to do to help clean it up. But with that said, let's look at the video version of this just because it's fun. So let me go ahead and launch that video if I can find it. Here we go. Cool. So simple prediction, but one that I actually am very sure even today is coming true as we speak. So I cannot tell. Can someone? Oh, there we go. It looks like we have the presentation back. So what are the practical takeaways here? I mean, it really comes down to, in some ways, I'm a security person. This is good. The truth is, one of the reasons the mandates are coming out, the reason they're mandating their customers increase their security is because it's the lack of security that's causing them to get hacked and causing the insurers to have to pay out. So from a security perspective, this is more forceful ways of getting businesses to be more secure. And I generally think that's a good thing. But in general, I think most of us agree we don't want someone to have to force us to do something. When it comes to that point where compliance or regulation is what makes us do it, it's kind of a bummer. It would be better for you to just be able to get here at your own speed, to be able to have a good enough security where you don't have to worry about that and to have to get there yourself. So what can you do? Some of you may be doing all of this, but some of the types of mandates we see are stuff I've already mentioned. They do external network vulnerability scans, both passive and active ones. And if they find flaws, they're going to let you know. They have been looking very heavily at remote access. You've heard Mark and me in past presentations talk about the danger of RDP without VPN. And we've even talked about the danger of VPN without MFA. Insurers have keyed on to this in that they are looking for requiring MFA, at least on remote access. They check for your backups, they want to know about your policies, and they want to know about your business continuity plan. So this is a silver lining prediction, and that insurers forcing this might up the game of a lot of businesses' security. But I do know that being mandated to do that from somebody else can put pressure on businesses when they want to focus on other things. So just be aware that next time you are looking for cyber insurance, if you need it, this could become a thing for you. With that, we'll quickly get to our last prediction, Mark.
5-minute speed run mode. And so our last prediction is titled, and we'll call it Zero Trust. And as you can probably tell, we're poking fun at this new marketing term that has been assigned to something that we've basically, as security professionals, been pitching for the last multiple decades. Really, zero trust as an architecture boils down to the principle of least privilege in practice. For those that aren't security professionals, when we talk about principle of least privilege, we basically mean give a user or a system the amount of access, the minimal amount of access that it needs in order to accomplish its job function and basically block all else. We could probably spend an hour talking about zero trust. In fact, I have on a few webinars here at WatchGuard. But really, with zero trust, it starts with just all based on identity and knowing your assets and knowing your users with some certainty. And that has a pretty strong requirement for good authentication. So this is, again, multi-factor authentication giving you reasonable certainty that this is Mark logging in from his corporate issued laptop from his home IP address in the Seattle, Washington area. And then once you've identified that user and the system that they're connecting from, then you can provide secure access to just these systems that they should have access to. So starting with a deny by default architecture, and then only opening up exactly what I need to log in. For example, if I worked in the accounting department, there's no need for me to have network level access to our source code repository. And so while you could restrict that with, login credentials off the repository, by just straight up blocking the network access to it, you can limit your exposure to things like vulnerabilities in that application or lateral movement if I, as an adversary, have compromised someone else's credentials in order to get into that system. And so,
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Zero.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add, if we, as Mark said, we're poking fun that this is essentially least privilege because the graybeards of security, this is how they intend least privilege. But if I were to say the main focus here is the industry has been okay with zero trust when you consider external users, people that you don't trust that much. We've been really good. Oh, they're external. I'm very much going to limit what they control. If I were to say that the reason we need a new term zero trust is to remind people you have to do this internally. So I would say a big focus of zero trust is it's not the external internet user, although that you should have least privilege for sure. We're paying more attention to these users that we're giving wide control in our own employees, really, that we're giving access to things they really don't need to do their job.
Yeah,
Sorry,
exactly.
Mark.
And for time's sake, let's hop into the video and then we can give you our actual takeaway for zero trust.
Doing it now. Let's. Courtney nailed it, by the way. She's someone in marketing that one of our leaders. Fantastic. She did awesome.
Mad props to all of our guests across these silly videos. And congratulations, Corey. You've gotten me to watch more videos of myself in the last 1 hour than I have in the entire time I've worked at WatchGuard.
Cool. We're a bit over.
Anyways,
Why don't we finish the practical takeaway?
yep. So again, it basically boils down to adopt the zero trust paradigm internally. So treat your internal users the same way you would treat external users. Assume the breach is what it boils down to. Assume a compromise, and then deploy your tools and technologies in a way that can help you identify that potential lateral movement from one of those compromised systems. And again, we call it zero trust. You can call it whatever the heck you want, as long as you are following that principle of least privileged and helping secure your internal networks just as strongly as you could secure your external networks.
Yeah. And I think you get it. As much as we're poking fun at the term, we believe in the term. So it is something that really, truly is important to modern security moving forward. And with that, sorry for the extra 3 minutes, but I haven't seen any questions yet. I don't know if Mark has any in his interface, but we're happy to take questions. And we also encourage you to use either the questions or chat. If you would like to share predictions of your own, feel free to do that. We'd be happy to comment on your own predictions too. So if
Yep.
there's any questions, Mark, or let me know.
We have. So we've got a couple of at least questions about what we think about some certain predictions. One of them is the future of car security and self-driving or keyless electronic cars. And if you followed our predictions for the past few years, you'll know that last year we actually had one around, I guess, electric vehicles, or at least in that regard, with hacking into charging stations to potentially impact the ability to charge your electric vehicle. Corey, maybe you want to throw in your own 2 cents on where you think the future of car security is going?
You kind of nailed it. We even before that prediction last year, a few before, car hacking was a big prediction and still is. The main reason we didn't really talk about automotive this year is because we try not to do the same prediction, give a few years between topics. But cars are IoT. It really falls into all our feelings about IoT, OT, whatever freaking acronym you want to put on a computer that doesn't look like a computer. And we think what you're talking about, self-driving, not only are these cars wirelessly through 5G connected to the entertainment system, but now they're connected to some cloud data, and they heavily leverage that cloud data in order not to run into people. So there's a lot, and of course we have drive-by-wire systems in cars. It used to be the potential for a car hack of, say, your entertainment system in the electronic computer units in your car was very limited, because at best maybe they can put on the brakes, but they couldn't turn the wheel. As everyone knows, there's systems now that allow them to turn the wheel and everything else. So the more computerized and smart cars get, the more dangerous potential any vulnerabilities in their network connected systems become. So we absolutely think car hacks would be a thing. We just couldn't find a new way to, at least last year we talked about charging as being the vector. This year we wanted to kind of give automotive a break, and we're waiting for that new thing that's going to add the new risk.
Next question was asking our prediction on what's our prediction on the outcome of the Apple and NSO Group lawsuit. And I am not a legal expert, and so I'm not going to weigh too much of my 2 cents into where I think this lawsuit's going to end up. But basically, if you're not familiar, because NSO Groups, most of their exploits primarily targeted iOS devices, that obviously kind of ticked off Apple. And just a couple weeks ago, I think it was the end of November, Apple turned around and filed a lawsuit against NSO Group for not reporting these vulnerabilities and for some of these state-sponsored activities that came because of this. Again, not a lawyer. I'm not even going to try and figure out where this one's going to go. But I feel like that we're going to see potentially lawsuits like this pop up in the future as some of these basically malware as a service officially companies continue to attack and exploit products widely used across the country or across the world even.
I also think we'll see private pressures too. Companies are often owned by stockholders, venture capitalists, or private equities. And even the company that we've seen at the NSO Group, its ownership has changed hands. And in some cases, that wasn't because of business things, that was because of the bad press. Essentially, the NSO Group, the creators of it had to buy back their company because no one really liked the fact that they were doing this. So besides legal pressure, there'll also be business pressures put on companies that are doing things that don't help the world.
100%. So there's just one last one in here. The question is about DDoS and what our predictions around the future of distributed denial of service attacks. And I guess, I mean, the easy prediction is they're going to get bigger. Like, it seems like every single year we find another way to amplify a reflective amplification attack even more than previously. Like back in the day, it was what DNS was probably one of the more popular ones, and it had an amplification factor of a few like 10 to 20 times or so. Now we see ones like memcached that can amplify it 10 to 20,000 times or so. It seems like a lot of these UDP-based protocols that are exposed to the internet end up being vulnerable to the style of reflection attack that then enables some of these massive denial of service attacks that we're seeing against organizations.
And if I were to offer an off-the-cuff prediction on how exactly this will happen, I would state it like in the past I've had what I call peanut butter and chocolate predictions, where you take two things that are known to happen and you put them together. So Mark just talked about one thing growing the size and resilience of DOS attacks is this kind of reflective amplification attack, where you don't need a ton of attackers to do something. One is enough. but by reflecting off some other network service, it could make a bigger attack. That's what Mark just explained. That's the peanut butter. The chocolate is botnets. Botnets are the whole other way. They're just pure mass. If I have 100,000 computers and I send one packet at a time, it's still 100,000 of them. So when you put those together, imagine 100,000 computers all doing a reflected amplification attack. And that's where you grow to scales that feel insane to me. So for DDoS attacks, that's probably where I would go.
Cool. Yeah. Great prediction. Obvious prediction. One I assume will probably come true very soon. And with that, that's the end of our questions. So thank you all for attending the webinar. Really appreciate it. And thanks again for sticking around for those that you did 9 minutes over.
One more thing before you go. When we close the webinar, you will see a survey that's going to pop up. So please feel free to fill out that survey, because we would love to hear from you what you think about this webinar and get your recommendation. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks, Corey. Thanks, Mark. As always, you did a fantastic job. And due to this is the last webinar of the year, we hope that you have a really Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year's. We will see you in January again.